everybody, to the Russell Hobbs Show, where you learn about interesting people, answers to life, the keys to the universe are all here for your taking. Today, we have a very, very special guest, my good old buddy, Eric Couch. How are you, Eric?
Hey, Russ. Good to be here, man. Thanks for the invite.
Well, I'm so glad you actually showed up. Not that you're the kind of guy that doesn't, but yeah, here we are. So
that's 90% of life, showing up. Kind of a big deal.
See, you're just like a walking fortune cookie. These things just pour as these profound little cookies come out. I love it. And that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I sometimes come across, I sound sarcastic, and sometimes I am, but that was sincere.
Sometimes, I've always said, two things, right? Yesterday, I actually said something to my sister, and I was like, dude, that sounds like a fortune cookie. I was like, it actually was from my heart, which I've never said that before, but I literally said it to her. I was like, it's from my heart. But the other thing is, I've always wanted to make a fortune cookie, but completely inappropriate. Like, I've talked about this for years. Like, I want to those, Bean Boozled, that you've got the jelly beans that are great, but then you've got the Bean Boozled that tastes like vomit, and, just drop some in some good jelly beans. I just want to go to a Chinese restaurant and make up some that's that wasn't chicken, meow, or something like that. Watch
mess
out when
with
you
the
walk
customer.
outside.
Just mess with the customer.
Yeah.
So, it's funny how the fortune cookie has now railroaded the show. But it's funny now. I went to lunch the other day with my best buddy Blake, and we get the fortune cookies and we open them, and there's blank pieces of paper in the fortune cookies. Oh. And I was saying, isn't this ironically symbolic of the age that we're living in right now? Right? The blank fortune cookie. So I was like, oh no, more fortune cookies. So the waitress brought out more fortune cookies. Yeah. And one of them was blank, and one of them had a fortune on it. So it took 3 tries to get a couple of fortunes. And our future was completely dependent on these fortune cookies.
You had a blank slate. You could make your own future.
Well, no, that's a good take. I like that. But no, actually, I was
just write your own fortune on it.
But I had submitted to the fortune cookie gods at that moment. I needed a message. I know.
Come on, give me something.
And that's God with a little G, by the way.
Yeah.
So Eric Couch is here.
Yeah.
And this is not the Fortune Cookie Show, although it's a good time to talk about our sponsor, Fortune Cookie Inc. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as if we had them as a sponsor. So, Eric, I want to know more about you. The audience wants to know more about you. You and I met long ago. When our children were in private school at the beautiful Grace Academy in North Dallas with the awesome Jim Clark. Overseeing the festivities daily at the school. And you and your wife, Catherine, were so sweet and just cool people at the school. And our boys became friends, Eric and William, Evan and William.
Wow, yeah.
And, so much has happened since then, maybe a decade.
Yeah.
And so I like having you in today. And I want to know, so where'd you grow up and what was your life like when you were young?
Wow. So I grew up in Baytown, Texas, just east of Houston, refinery. My entire family's refinery. And when I say entire, I mean entire family. My grandfather was at the refinery as a chemical engineer. He was a brainiac, so much so that the entire family played him in Trivial Pursuit, and he still beat all of us. It'd be 10-1, and Grandpa Joe would still wipe the floor with us. And then my mom worked there, and it's funny, everybody makes fun of me, including my family, because I only buy Exxon, right? For years, I would only buy Exxon. And it's because...
you're on E and you're going...
At Exxon, yeah.
Wait, I know there's an Exxon coming. Oh, we're going to run out of gas. Yeah. Oh, there's an Exxon.
And even more so, even if I saw a Mobil, because it's Exxon Mobil, I wouldn't go to a Mobil, because I'm like, well, what if they ever split up? I want Exxon to get better stock. But none of my family went to Exxon, but my mom got a GED. She was a single mom raising 4 kids, and she got a job at Exxon. And, we never had a lot, but we also didn't miss out, right? Really frugal, and it was amazing. My mom just busted her tail and took care of us. And people would say, what does your mom do? And I was like, she's a photographer. And they're like, oh, that's cool. Because you're Baytown, most people don't make much money. And but she had a $10 million camera because she's taken, I don't know, something like oil. I didn't know what she did. I just knew that every year she went to some school up in Wisconsin, and every single person but her had a MD or a PhD. And one of them was like a diplomat of Africa, and one of them was like, you know, literally like royalty. And then there's my mom with a GED, right? And so I'm a hyper loyal person to begin with. But my whole family, my brothers, my sister, their spouses, their kids, my step siblings, my stepdad, like everybody's refinery. So I grew up in that world, and
so you weren't oil field trash, you were refinery trash.
Refinery, yeah. There's a big difference, yeah, yeah. Everybody's refinery.
It's refined trash.
It's refined.
And I
trash.
don't mean to insult you. I'm just making a joke.
Yeah. So I was there and grew up in it, and then parents divorced when I was 9, day after my 9th birthday. Not that I remember, but it was the day after my 9th birthday. And my dad literally lived in every single part of Houston, north, south, east, west, central. So people were like, which part of Houston you grew up in? And I'm like, all of them. Everyone. So I lived in Pasadena for a year in high school, moved to the Woodlands my senior year. And going from Baytown to the Woodlands is kind of like going from the hood to Fantasy Island. It was a wild difference of going from seeing shootings at school, and we had hundreds of gang members, and literally I saw people get shot at school, to, you know, the 16-year-old with a red Porsche and a bow out in front of the school, you know, and that was not an uncommon occurrence. And my senior year of high school, the Woodlands was voted the second snobbiest school in the country next to 90210 Beverly Hills. So it was a wild difference, but loved them both, still get along, talk to everybody.
So you were you moved almost every year then, different schools.
Well, I was in the same place through my sophomore year. Dad moved around a lot, and I'd go see him on the weekends. And then after my sophomore year, I was gotten too big for my britches, and my mom and I loved each other, but we did not like each other at all. And she was like, "You need to go."
So you went and lived with your dad in the
I went
Woodlands.
and lived with my dad. Well, in Pasadena for a year.
Okay.
And they were like, "Where would you like to live?" Yeah. And all of us were like, "The Woodlands."
Oh, right.
So then we found a home and moved there. And
because I like to know who people are
Yeah.
in high school. So it's like, Eric Couch walking down the hall in high school. What were you like? How do you describe yourself?
So I was the kid that was in choir, and I was also first, starter in football. So I was both, and I was friends with not one group, but I was friends with like every group, right? And I'm kind of bouncing around, and I got friends all over the place.
So you went to different schools, so you learned how to make friends. You were sort of gregarious.
I did learn some lessons by switching schools. Mm-hmm. So when I went to Pasadena, I only stayed there through spring break, and I quit, and I was like, I'll never go back. Mm-hmm. And it was kind of in the hood. Got a lot of good out of it, but I ended up getting attacked by 3 different guys one night after a baseball game, and coach just walked by as I had 3 guys ganging up on me, and I was like, I'll never go back. And but what I learned is, I'd come from this big 5A school, public, and I'd gone to this little 2A private school, and I was always, and I didn't realize it, but I was always talking about how great, and how small this is, and this is easy, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, I was first team all district, and I was doing really well, even though I'm not a big guy. But
what position?
Center.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
So everybody's like this, I'm shorter than all of them.
You're the scrappy little center.
Yeah, but I'm the scrappy little center. But because I was apparently talking, even though I loved where I was at, it caused some friction, right? So when I moved from Pasadena and then we moved to the Woodlands, I had learned a lesson, because I was like, man, I need to be grateful for where I'm at and not talking about where I've been, right? Because people don't like that. Just like, if we're talking, if I focus on you, you're going to feel like we're best friends, even though you may not learn a thing about me. But if I focus on you and get you talking the whole time, it's going to be great. But if we meet and I'm talking about me the whole time and all the stuff that I've done, you're going to be like, man, that guy's a pompous jerk. I don't.
Well, yeah, you just mentioned an epidemic that's happening in our country.
Yeah.
we won't get into that. So you're right. It alienates people to come around like, oh, I'm the new guy, but my other school was better, right? So
right. I came from this big 5A school with 2,000 freshmen, and this school has 50 kids in the entire school, right? Yeah. So it was a big difference. But it's learning not to, focus and being grateful on where you're at and telling people that you're in front of how they're awesome. And people are awesome, right? Sometimes you have to look a little harder than others, but everybody has a story. Everybody brings a benefit, and if we'll take the time to find that benefit, we won't get surrounded by 3 guys wanting to beat us up one night, right?
Well, that is very true. So you're in the new school. You're learning cultural maneuvers and how to have new friends and negotiate all that. So what did you want to do? What was your life plan like when you were a senior?
When I was a senior, I really had no idea. So I started on the football team. My dad had been, I don't know if he was actually an All-American, but he had been at that level, that caliber. And he played football and baseball at SMU with Don Meredith. Dad was a middle linebacker.
That's awesome.
So Dad played college football and college baseball because he was an overachiever. My granddad played college football, so I always figured I'd play college football. Even though I'm 5'10" and 200 pounds, at my biggest, right? At least in shape, right? So it wasn't really in the cards, but when I moved my senior year, we had made it through, 6 weeks of, pre-training and stuff, and then into our second, third week of games out of 10, and I'm riding the bench the whole time, and I'm like, I've always started, I've always been all district, and now I'm riding the pine, and I'm like, this is not me. So I go to the coach, and I'm like, at this new school in the Woodlands, and I'm like, hey, coach, I think I want to jump, and I'll go play soccer or baseball so I can get a jump on that and play there. And he's like, Couch, if you don't play for us, you don't play for any team at this school. And I'm like, Coach, that's the problem. I'm not playing. And so he wouldn't release me, and I was like, well, I'm not staying here because nothing's happening. So I quit football, and I was already in choir at this new school, and so then I joined. They had another choir. I find out that there's an additional choir, and turns out choir is not a sport. So I could sing in the choir all I wanted. So I joined 2 different choirs at the school, and had a blast. And it ended up I'd loved choir. I'd been in it. I started in 8th grade, and I'd wanted to start before then because my oldest brother, who's 9 years older than me, he sang, and he's good looking. He had lots of friends, and he always had girls around him, and he's 9 years older, so he's like the ultimate. And he was in choir, so I was like, I want to sing too. So I started singing in 8th grade, had a blast. Went into 9th grade, it was horrible. Went to the new school my junior year, it was horrible. Sign up again my senior year. I don't know why I keep trying. And in the Woodlands, it was great. And then I ended up getting in the second choir in the Woodlands. And turns out it was the #1 choir in the nation. In fact, we went to Washington and competed against a bunch of other schools. And they had everybody to go, you had to have won a competition. So it was the best of the best, and we just cleaned the floor with all of them. And it was a great experience. So I get to the end of the year, which, by the way, what was I doing my senior year? So I was doing that. I'm the kid that sang The Dance by Garth Brooks at prom, a cappella, because everybody starts cheering and says, Eric, come sing. I was voted best singer, mainly because I played football and I was in choir. So I was like the one guy everybody knew.
Wait, right? Can you do a couple of bars of that real quick? Just a verse chorus.
Looking back on the memory of the dance we shared beneath the stars above. For a moment, all the world was right. How could I have known that you'd ever say goodbye? And I'm glad I didn't know the way it all would end, the way it all would go. Our lives are better left to chance.
How awesome that. Yeah. I mean, I requested, you delivered. That's beautiful, man. So you got the voice. Okay, so the choir became your new
It became my new thing.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I'm getting ready to graduate high school, and I had no plans. I'd actually talked to the Navy about going there. They wanted me to be in their nuclear engineering program, and I'm like, I'm good at a lot of things. I'm an idiot at science. Why do they want me to be a nuclear engineering? And it turns out had like a 98% dropout rate, and then they could put you wherever they wanted. And I'm like, I think that's why, because I was like, this guy is not a scientist. Good at math, horrible at science. So I was thinking about that because I didn't have any money for college. My family didn't have any money to give me for college. And then my choir director in high school, who I didn't always get along with, but, I always show up. I always do my part. But I ask questions that aren't always accepted well, because if I see something that seems off, I'm going to ask. So we didn't always get along because I called him out a couple times privately, but I did. But at the end of the year, he's like, Eric, what's your plan for college? And I'm one of like 2 kids that weren't rich in the school. Like everybody's got a lot of money except me and like this other guy. And I was like, he's like, what's your plans for college? And I'm like, I don't know. He's like, well, you thought about singing? No, it wasn't on my radar at all. Like I never even thought of it as an option. He's like, would you be interested? And I said, sure. He's like, okay, I'll make a call. And just based on his phone call, a week later, I show up at this junior college in East Texas, and I walk in and shake Mr. Brumley's hand, introduce myself. He's like, sit down, let's talk for a minute. So I sit down. He's like, I'm going to give you a full ride, sign here. And then after I'd signed all the paperwork, then he's like, all right, let's go in the other room so I can hear you sing.
Wow.
I mean, sight unseen, just.
By the way, he had the reputation.
Well, because my my college choir director had been my high school. He had been the director for my high school choir director.
So they gave you a full ride to be in the choir? Is that what they were doing? Okay.
So when my high school choral director called him and said, hey, give this kid a shot, he gave me a full ride just off of his word.
No recordings in the mail or anything?
Nothing.
Okay.
He had never heard me sing.
Yeah.
I shook his hand. I looked him in the eye. I sat down at the table, and I said, I'll work real hard. And he's like, sign here. And then let's go hear you sing. And that's really how I did it. And I got to travel all over the world singing. And
so specifically, that was which college was that?
Panola College.
Oh, that was the Panola College Choir.
That was the Panola College Choir. And then that day I went in the other room to sing, and there's this girl in there, and she's like, are you going to try out for the pipers? And I'm like, I don't know what a piper is. And she's like, oh, that's the show choir. That's like the kind of the elite choir at the college, but you sing and dance and do a little acting. And I was like, sure. So Natalie's like, well, okay, well, what can you sing? Okay, well, I just heard you. Can you dance? And I was like, I can 2-step. I can learn. So for the next 2 years, I was in the show choir with Natalie Woods Stainer, who a couple years ago, some people would know her because she was, somebody said, I don't know if it's true, but somebody said she was voted one of the top 10 all-time hottest Cowboys cheerleaders.
Oh, wow.
And she was on Hot on Homes, and now she's with Prather on his show. So, but yeah, she was my dance partner and great friend, and like a sister. I mean, we're both big dorks with each other.
Beautiful how that door opened for you.
Yeah.
That was a lot of opportunity, and your gift opened that door for you there.
And the Lord's always just gone before me.
Yeah.
And just covered my steps.
So what was your major then?
Music.
Okay.
Real simple. If you sing, it's free. If you don't, it's not. Okay, I'll sing. So I spent 2 years at Panola College as a junior college, and then I transferred up to Dallas Baptist University. Was not planning to go there. It actually turned them down up front because I always figured I was supposed to go to San Antonio. I had my whole future written out there at the church, big old church. I was going to be the music guy there. All the cutest girls I'd ever met were in San Antonio. My family's in San Antonio, grandmother and aunt and cousins. So I always figured I'd go there. And as the summer went on, it was like I just did not have a peace about San Antonio. And I couldn't tell you why. As I got more and closer, I was just like, this is not where I'm supposed to be. And I'm like, okay, Lord, where am I supposed to be? And it was like Dallas Baptist, DBU. Had no idea why. I just know that's where I'm supposed to go. And my good friend at Panola College, he was like a mentor and dad to me, Bernie Tita, said, well, he paid for half the scholarships at the college and in the theater department and the music department, and he owned a bunch of restaurants and businesses in town and all this stuff. And he's like, well, I'll pay for it. Like, it's a lot of money. He's like, it's okay. I got money. I'll pay for it. Go get you an apartment, sign up for DBU. Is that where you're supposed to be? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, okay, we'll go do that. And I'll cover it. Don't worry about it. Is that where you're supposed to be? Yes. Okay. Then I'll pay for it.
Beautiful.
So I signed up for DBU. I'd known Bernie for a couple of years. I met him when I went to Panola. And then he's like, but I want you to do me one favor. I want you to go home this weekend, and I want you to ask your family to help you. Doesn't matter what. I don't care. I don't care what they help with. I don't care how much they give. It doesn't matter. They just need to be involved in your life, because I always did it on my own. So I go home for the weekend to ask my family to help. They say no, but I asked, and I'm sitting at the kitchen table Sunday night, and my phone rings, and it's my college choir director, Mr. Brumley, and he's like, I'm like, couch residence, and he's like, Eric, this is Mr. Brumley. I've been in his class 4 hours a day for the last 2 years, every day, 5 days a week. So when I hear his voice, I knew exactly who it was. But he's like, it's Mr. Brumley. And I'm like, I know. And he's like, has anybody from Panola called? And I go, no. He's like, well, you need to sit down. I was like, what happened? And he's like, Bernie was arrested earlier today for murder. And he's already confessed. He killed Miss Nugent 9 months ago, and he hid her in the deep freeze. So if you've heard of the movie Bernie, not Weekend at Bernie's, but Bernie with Jack Black and Matthew McConaughey,
I just
Shirley
saw
MacLaine.
that last week.
So that's Bernie, and the day he was arrested, he had this little bitty 1,200 square foot home, 2 bedrooms. He lived in one, I lived in the other room. And he was the one paying for me to go to college. In the movie, you'll see that they confiscate. They said he bought like 6 cars. I was one of them, because my car died, and I almost died, 5 months earlier.
So the Bernie that sponsored you to go to DBU
is that Bernie?
And you were living with Bernie.
I was living with Bernie.
And the true story with the Jack Black movie, and it's interesting the way they shot that is they interview people that were part of the story. It's sort of a docudrama.
Yeah. Rick Linklater calls it a dark comedy, because it is dark. There's a murder, right? It's dark. Mm-hmm. But that's like 1% of the movie. The rest of the movie is just interviewing the
Richard
people.
Linklater
and it's
made that one?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And Bernie was actually released out of prison from 2014 to 16. I'll have to check, something like that. Right around March, April.
So you were probably part of that production. They interviewed you.
I wasn't in the movie. They didn't know about me. But they consulted
you, though.
No, not at all.
Okay.
But I did testify in the original trial, and I testified in his 2016 trial when they put him back in prison. But he was free for 2 years, and he lived at Rick's house. And I went to Rick's house a bunch of times.
So you're at DBU, and Bernie's like, go to DBU. He wrote you money.
Well, I wasn't there yet. It hadn't started yet.
Oh, that's what my question was going to be. When Bernie got in trouble, how'd you pay for DBU after that?
So I'm like a month before school starts, and just me transitioning from planning to go to UT San Antonio to DBU was a big thing, because in my world, especially with my dad, you did not talk about money. For one, he was a very imposing person. Again, former college athlete, and he was still really imposing. And you didn't change your mind. So me going from UT San Antonio to DBU was a monumental terror, because I'd already committed, and Bernie was going to pay for me to go to UT San Antonio. So he'd already put money down on stuff. So when he found out that I didn't want to go to UT anymore, I was terrified that he was going to react like my dad did. And instead, he's like, Eric, it's okay. And I was like, but. And he's like, Eric, where are you supposed to go? And I was like, DBU. He's like, then go to DBU. I get emotional about it, because he's the first person in my life that ever really just believed in me. And that's not true, but he was the first person who wasn't like my mom or my aunt,
Right. You saw sort of the hand of God with a kind of a stranger caring about you.
Yeah.
And your destiny unfolding. And what's interesting in that true story, I want to call it a movie, but it was actually
the movie's like 99% accurate.
Yeah. What's interesting is, even though he murdered someone, or maybe
Yeah.
more than one.
No, just the one, but yeah.
All the people in the city loved him because
They
he
loved
did
him.
so much for everybody.
It's the first time in U.S. history that there was a mistrial change of venue. You know, there's been thousands of those in history, but it's because the entire town wants to lynch the person, so they can't find an unbiased jury. So they have to have a mistrial and move it because the whole town wants to lynch them. Well, this is the first time in U.S. history they had a mistrial and change of venue because the entire town said, let him go. And
That's
and the
awesome.
DA, Danny Buck's like, but he killed her. He confessed to killing her. And they're like, we know. Let him go. He killed her. She was mean. She was mean to all of us. Nobody liked her. You know, that's why in the movie the lady's like, hell, I'd have done it for $5. I would have done it, right? And it's like, that was an actress lady, and you know, and sometimes they're making light of it. Miss Nugent had a very bad reputation, even as a college student. Before I ever met her, everybody's like, "This is Bernie. You know, that guy over there. That's Bernie. You want to meet him? He's amazing, and he helps with the College of Music and Fine Arts and all the musicals and stuff like that." But that's Miss Nugent next to him. She's really mean. She's old mean. Well, I met her a bunch of times. She is never mean when I was around. I mean, there was Bernie was definitely at her hip, right? So there was something was going on, as they allude in the movie. But to me, she was just an 80-year-old woman. I mean, she's a female. I was all about chasing chicks in college, but not 80-year-old ones. So she wasn't on my radar at all. Like, I met her a bunch of times in the movie. They show in New York, or going to the Van Cliburn in Fort Worth, or going to the musicals. I was literally at every one of those. Like, Bernie sitting here, Miss Nugent sitting next to him, I'm sitting on the other side of him. Like, I'm right there at all of those things. They show the picture of them in New York, and there's like a boat, you know, one of those things a buoy that you throw out to someone, and there's a picture of he and Miss Nugent in the movie that they show. Well, she was right in front of us. We took a picture with Bernie at the same buoy. Like, I show people on my phone and stuff, and I'm like, you know, here's us on that. So the same scene we're in, because we were all there together, right?
Okay, so now I want to phrase the question as this. You were at DBU, already signed up and committed, and then Bernie got in trouble.
Yeah, and everything.
So tell me
gone.
how you continued DBU and how your relationship went with Bernie.
Good question. So I broke. You know, when your best friend and the first person ever to really invest in you, who would ask if he could adopt me, is in prison for murder. And up to that point, I'd had like 8 people murdered in my life within about a 3-year period. So I had been really broken by murder, but it was people murdering my loved ones. So now I know the murderer, and it was just a whole different. So I'm just twisted and torn. But I would tell people, I was like, you know, I was broken, but I wasn't just broken. I was turned to ash and dust, and then the dust was blown away. Like, I was just.
Like, you don't know who you can trust.
Yeah, I was just completely gone. And, you know, my mom kept coming up to me and just bawling, and I cried 24/7. And my mom's like, son, if you know anything, just tell me. If you know anything, she's like, I will defend you to the end. I'll use everything I got, but you got to tell me. And I'm like, Mom, I didn't know anything. Like, I lived with him. I'd seen on the fridge, there was a, you know, one of those fridge calendars that you all have, right? That you get from the real estate person, right? And it said, you know, court. Well, I figured he's got jury duty. I didn't know, right? I mean, I'd seen it on there, but I'm like, he's got jury duty or something. I don't know. And I didn't ask because Bernie always kept the attention on you. So I was completely broken and just shattered. They let me go back to the house and get my belongings. In retrospect, I probably should have got a lot more because he wasn't getting any of it, but I just got my stuff out. And then they wanted to interrogate me. So I went in, my mom went with me, and that was the last time I saw Bernie. They were like, hey, Eric, as soon as I sat down there, like, Eric, we know you don't know anything, but we do need to know, like, what you've seen or heard or what you do know, right? And then they were like, do you want to see Bernie? And I said, yeah, I'd really like that. And so they brought him in, and we got to hug for a minute and tell each other we loved each other. And that was the last time I saw him, from 1997 until 2012 when the movie came out, and I saw him behind bars in 2012. So it's just behind the glass. And then I didn't see him in person until 2014, the day he was released. And we both made the front page of AP for the whole country because The day he was released, the one thing they said in the courtroom is, Bernie, this is a murder trial. You cannot smile. When I'd gotten a phone call from a friend at like 9:30 in the morning, I'm at my office in like work clothes because I'm having a work day at the office, and they're like, they're having a trial for Bernie today. So I run in my office. I tell my wife and my assistant, I'm like, I got to go. They're having a trial for Bernie. And I hightail it to Carthage in 2014. And I run up to the doors right as they're closing. So I'm sitting there looking through the crack for an hour while they're doing all their stuff. And all the media people behind me are like, hey, do you know this guy? And I'm like, yeah. Well, then they have an intermission, and I go in and I sit literally from here to here, right? He's on the other side of that little wall thing, and I'm in the chair here, and he's there. He doesn't see me. And he finally stands up, and he's stretching, and he's looking around, and he turns, and he sees me, and he just goes, Eric. And every AP person took a photo right then. So if you look up Bernie, you'll see there's a picture of him in the orange, but most of them have cut me out like usual. I'm like Mike Wazowski in Monsters, Inc., right? I'm in the photo, but I'm not, right? So it's some older lady who's standing like right next to me. She's in the photo, and you see Bernie smiling, but he's looking right at me. So that was the first time I'd seen him since, and actually in person. He was released that day in Rick custody, and he had to live with Rick, which he did for the 2 years that he was out. So going back, that's seeing him. When everything fell apart, I just fell apart. And probably 2 weeks later, my mom comes up to me, and she's not a person of faith. And she's seen God just do amazing things in my life. And she said, Eric, she grabs me by the shoulder. She just comes right up to me, and she's like, son, I don't understand how your God does the things that he's done, but I've seen it. And I know that Bernie would want you to go to college, and that you said you were supposed to go to college, and I just want you to consider it, right? And she just left it at that, and I was like, okay, Mom, I'll try, but I don't know. You know, at that point, I didn't have DBU, and everything had fallen apart because he was going to pay, and now he's not, right, because he's in prison. So the next day, it's like 2 weeks before school starts, and I call DBU, and I'm like, hey, I know it's 2 weeks before school starts, but do y'all have any scholarships? And they just laugh at me. Like, just straight up, dude, you turned us down. No, we don't have anything. Good luck. And same thing with dorms. There's 6 people ahead of you, and they have to all not show up the first day of school. So yeah, if 6 people don't show up the first day of school and don't tell us, then you're number 7 and you can get a dorm. And I'm like, well, it's a 5-hour drive from Houston to Dallas each way. So that's 10 hours a day of driving in addition to school. That dog won't hunt. And I got that for 2 straight weeks, calling, emailing, having other people call, and it was just pure red tape. I get up to Friday before school starts. It's starting on Monday, right? It's now Friday morning at like 9:15 in the morning, and I'm sitting at the same kitchen table I'd gotten the phone call from when Mr. Brumley said that Bernie had passed away. And as I'm sitting there, I was reading this book my sister gave me on spiritual warfare. And it just said, the enemy is always going to attack you any way he can. And you got to give everything to God. And it gave a story of these people driving down a freeway, and they had given everything to God, but they hadn't prayed over their dog. And driving down the freeway, the dog jumped out and died in traffic. And I was like, what a sick story. But I was like, I don't know. So I just closed the book, and I just closed my eyes, and I'm sitting at my kitchen table, and I'm like, God, I think I've given this to you, but if I haven't, I give it to you right now. And my phone rang. Literally that quick. 3-4 seconds. Couch Residence. Eric, this is Dr. Steekman Holcomb from Dallas Baptist University, who I'm having dinner with tonight when I leave here. And he's like, one of the students got throat problems this summer, not going to be able to come in. If you're interested, we'd like to give you his scholarship.
Wow. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'd like that a lot. All right, it's 75%. We'll give it to you if you'll take it. I'll take it. Thank you so much. Hang up the phone. 5 minutes later, phone rings. Couch Residence. Hey, Eric, this is Dr. John Plotz at DBU. We've got a dorm available. Would you like it? Yes, sir. I would love it. Don't have a way to pay for it. But I got a dorm now. So I got a scholarship and a dorm, and neither of them know about the other. Thanks, Dr. Platts. Hang up the phone. 10 minutes later, my phone rings again. Couch residence. Eric, this is Miss Edith Wilburn at the scholarship that you had signed up for 2 years ago. Random deal. I showed up with my buddy, and I'm sitting in the waiting room. He's applying for this grant or something. And the lady's like, well, aren't you going to fill it out? I'm like, oh, I can't. My parents make too much money. I don't get anything. I get the shaft. And she's like, oh, we don't look at that. You should apply. And I'm like, okay. So 2 years earlier, I had applied for this scholarship, this grant deal, and I got it and he didn't. Felt kind of bad about that. But it was like $800. And I was like, sweet. So Miss, I think it was Edith Hill. She's calling that morning and she's like, hey, we wanted to let you know there's a little bit more money in the fund this year. So we're going to increase it to $1,200 from $800 to $1,200. Wow. Thank you. It's the exact amount needed to pay for the dorm room I'd just gotten.
And that's all right after you just surrendered the whole
All of it
thing.
started within about 5 to 10 seconds after I say, God, if I haven't given it to you, I give it to you now. Surrender. And then within about 40 minutes of that prayer, the fourth and final call came in, and it was my dad. And he's like, son, I know I haven't been able to help in the past, and it's not much, but I've got $1,000 I can give you. And $1,000 was the exact amount needed for the meal plan. So within 40 minutes, the Friday before school starts on Monday, but within 40 minutes of just saying, God, it's yours. I had a scholarship, a dorm, the exact amount to pay for the dorm, and the exact amount paid for the meal plan.
What year was that?
1997. And it's like, when your whole world falls apart and the person that you've admired most is in prison for murder, first-degree murder, but your whole world, like where you put all your hope, is just ripped out from underneath you and you feel like you got nothing left. God's still faithful. And he's right there in the midst of it with you.
Right. And not only that, but you were accurately hearing God about going to DBU.
And I knew. So I'd turned down I'd even had opportunities to go to other schools. So when my mom said, would you consider it? I was like, sure. So I actually looked at other schools and I got a full ride offer from like 3 other schools during that 2 weeks before school started deal when my mom grabbed me by the shoulders, because I've called my prior college director and he was like, yeah, there's Bill Clinton was president. The Clinton Foundation has a thing, and if you'll go around telling kids not to do drugs, you can go to ETBU or Stephen F. Austin or any school you want to that's locally. You just have to be available. So I was like, okay, I got a full ride doing that. And then I sat on it for about 48 hours and I'm like, no, I'm supposed to go to DBU. I don't know how I'm going to get in, but I know that's where I'm supposed to go.
Yeah, see, what's evident to me is that you were accurate in hearing to go to DBU.
Yeah.
And even though you had Bernie as a sponsor, which changed.
It did.
Then you just kept holding on, and then God showed you that he was going to make DBU happen through other means.
And it's not, God's always he's never late, right? They always say that. God's always on time. He's never late. But he's rarely on your time schedule.
Right.
I mean, it was like,
you got to stretch that faith a little bit.
He does.
So you're in DBU now.
Yeah.
And you're in the choir. I mean, the music department and the music program. And so there's 2 things there. What's haunting me, and that's not the right word, but I heard you say a minute ago that your mother was not a person of faith. Mm-hmm. So you, as a teen, now you're 18 or 19, going through all this stuff, you weren't really in a Christian family.
No.
How did you meet God and develop faith and all this on your own at such a young age?
I've always described it kind of like Abraham. There was no Bible when you read about, Genesis and all that of Abraham. There weren't churches. There wasn't Bibles. There wasn't preachers or anything like that. There was just one man out in the wilderness that heard the voice of God. And that's all I've ever been able to explain, because from as early as I can remember, I know when I was 3 years old, my dad would come in each night and we would kneel down on our knees and put our elbows on the bed and we'd pray together, right? And Dad taught me to pray, but really that was the extent.
But that's significant.
And it was significant,
and that's
right?
beautiful in a way. I love that, because it wasn't in a religious way of we go to church on Sunday to a building, which there's nothing wrong with that. That helps us grow and learn, right? But you, like Abraham, and with your dad out in the middle of the wilderness of life, your dad taught you that foundational thing,
one thing,
humbling yourself and praying, and connecting to God, and that is what or that was your foundation from 3 to DBU.
And it was because my siblings would say I was like the poltergeist kid, because when I was like, I don't know, 5 years old, family, we went to church my dad was a church guy because he was like, that's what good Christian people do. He didn't really have a relationship with God. He went to church to pick up women, and to look the part. And he came to know years later, in 2016, Dad came to know the Lord better, more closely than most anybody I've ever met. I mean, it was beautiful and amazing. But he would go to church. But once my parents divorced, they separated when I was 8, divorced when I was 9, like I said, we didn't go to church. But when I was younger, we had gone to this Methodist church, and I have 3 older siblings, 2 brothers and a sister, and all 4 of us were getting baptized that day. And I remember I was probably like 5 years old, and we're all sitting there next to each other. None of us are used to being in church. We're all a bunch of hoodlums. And I'm sitting next to my mom, and as we're waiting for like the time to come, I go from white knuckling it to just sheer terror. Like, I don't need to be doing this. This is not right. Something's wrong, whatever. I don't know what it was. But as I'm sitting there in that pew waiting for my turn, I just start like projectile vomiting, and my mom's like grabs my hand and walks me down the aisle, and I'm out. Never got baptized that day. And I tend to think it's because for me, it was a much more, in retrospect, it was a much more sincere. I didn't want to rush into that. So when I did surrender my life to the Lord, July 12th, 1994, and it wasn't just accepting Christ, because I think I probably did that when I was 2. Like, I've always known God, and I've always been set apart. But in 94, God was just like, Eric, it's time, like all in. And all my friends that were all in, they were called to ministry, and I was like, each one would say, well, I'm called to be a pastor, I'm called to be a music minister, I'm called to be evangelist, I'm called to be this. And for me, God just said, Eric, you're called to just be mine. And I remember distinctly thinking that, because it was so different than everybody else. It's, they're called to a career. I'm called to follow God. Wherever he takes me, whatever I do, it's going to be ministry.
Right. So in 94, you're a teen, but you're your own man in a way, and you devote yourself to God, and you get baptized. So now you're at DBU. This is like a 10-episode story. We're crunching into 60 minutes here, so I want to keep us moving along the timeline. Yeah. So you're at DBU. What significant happened at DBU? How did you get into your career?
I met a girl.
Oh.
I did. In retrospect, I'm like, why did I go to DBU? Why did the Lord make it so clear and so impressed on me that that's where I'm supposed to go? And I had a lot of great experiences. I met some amazing people, and a lot of positive came out from DBU. I love the fact that I went there. And my degree is worth more today than it was when I was there, because that campus just keeps getting prettier and prettier. It's gorgeous. But I truly believe the reason I ended up at DBU was to meet Catherine, because that's the one significant thing that happened that changed my life. And I met her, and before we ever dated or anything like that, I was always on staff at a church or working at some Christian camp every summer. And at the time, I was on staff at a church, but I needed something to do during spring break, because I was always busy. I'm always just doing something. I can't just sit and do nothing. It's just not in my blood.
Not a couch potato.
Yeah, even though I'm a couch. I try to get Love Seat, and I've never got anybody to buy into Love Seat. I've gotten couch potato my whole life. Never Love Seat.
Oh, so you want people to call you Love Seat. Okay, okay.
I can see a little Barry White, All
right.
Yeah, right. But no, it's never.
You could have gone to any college and learned and been educated and sang in the choir, but your destiny was to meet Catherine.
Yeah.
At DBU, and little Catherine was at DBU.
She was there. She was a freshman. I was a junior, and we met, hit it off, she really hit it off as far as she liked me from the moment we met. I wasn't so sure. She came from a lot of money. I didn't, right? I came from a mom with a GED who supported 4 kids. So we lived very frugally. She came from a lot of money. So it was a whole different thing. And I'm like, not my playground, not my people, but she's nice, right? But we became friends. And over time, she really proved that she was a very loyal, faithful person. And that meant more to me than anything. But before then, I needed something to do over spring break in 1998. I'm working on staff at a church, but I got nothing to do for a week, and I'm not going back to Houston. I don't know anybody there anymore. All my friends are in Dallas. So she's like, well, my dad has a company. Maybe he's got something you could do. So her dad's like, yeah, show up at 9 a.m. Monday morning, and I'll put you to work. So I show up there. He takes me to the very back of the office, and you'll know this is the 90s because there's a 6-foot-long fold-out table, and there's a phone with a 100-foot cable going all the way down the hall, right? Because we didn't have digital phones. And so there's this phone sitting on the table, and there's a script, and then there's a list of people to call. And he's like, let's practice the script 2 or 3 times. And we go through it, and then he's like, okay, call these people, say this to them. Here's how you transfer calls. Go fight, win. And I just start dialing people, and I'm telling them about something with life insurance. And they're like, man, that sounds great. Tell me more. And I'm like, I've done this for 8 minutes now. I have no idea what I'm talking about, but it does sound really cool, and I can transfer you to John or Mickey. But if I hang up on you, please call back because you're also like the 4th person I've transferred. And I just went through that and did it for a week. Had a blast.
Wait, were you singing to anybody on those?
No.
Oh,
Okay. I'm just talking.
So you were the guy. So Catherine, your new girlfriend.
No, we're just
you're just friends at this point.
Yeah, we didn't date for another year.
So her dad sort of was your door opening into calling and selling insurance, basically.
Yeah, so I worked for him that week, and then that summer I worked for him full-time during the summer. Actually, that's not true. I was always on staff at some place, but when I wasn't there, when I came back before school started, I worked for them. And I continued to work for them a little bit for the next couple years. And then when I graduated college, Catherine and I are now married. I had a degree in music education with a focus on vocal performance, but I didn't want to be a school teacher. It was just the most pragmatic option I had. You know, I could do church music, vocal performance, so just be a professional singer, or education. And I'm like, well, education is the only one that'll allow me to do all 3. But if I pick vocal performance, I can't educate, and I can't really be in a church, or vice versa. So the pragmatist, I took the one that I could do all of the above. And I was like, I'm not going to teach. So I needed a job. They needed an employee. They were always together. We traveled together. We vacationed together. We had Sunday lunches together. We went to church together. We worked together, and they were always talking business. So I was like, well, while I figure out what I want to do, I'll just work for them for a little while. 14 years later, I was still working for them, and was running their division on annuities, so retirement, safe money, protecting people's retirement.
Okay, so let me jump in the timeline.
Yeah.
So you and Catherine were married. You learned the business, selling annuities, and you became very successful in selling annuities. Now I know another landmark time that came through was you're happily married, daughter and son, making money, living the good American dream, going to a good church, because I know you guys.
Yeah.
And then what happened when significantly also I know that there was this thing that happened where the whole world was locked down in 2020, right? So what'd you do in 2020? Tell me about your how you kind of got back in the entertainment business in a way.
Yeah. So that was a fun one. So we get into 2020, right? We're all freaked out. Everybody's locked down at home. It's 2 weeks to get past this. That lasted into 2 years, right? But yeah, it's another story.
Well, it's still kind of going on.
Yeah, it's still kind of going on. We were all panicked on our what is this going to do? Are we all going to die? Or is the economy going to fall? I mean, nobody's going to work. We're all staying at home. There's no toilet paper, right? I mean, there's the sky is falling. And we didn't know what was happening. And I was like, man, this is so overwhelming and depressing. I was like, I just need some positivity. And everybody did. And that's where, one of my philosophies in life is say yes to opportunity. Show up, answer your phone and say yes. You know, when given opportunities, you can figure it out later, but say yes.
Have you ever seen Yes Man?
The Jim Carrey?
Great movie, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, go
Yes,
ahead.
Man.
He went a little too far with
A little bit too far. So along my way of just, you know, I've had opportunities to speak and sing and do stuff all over the world. I just wrote a book. And back then I'd met a guy who was a publicist, and he was really good at doing podcasts. And he's like, and I actually hired him for something completely different that was not working out well at all, social media. And I was like, this is a disaster. We're going to have to cut ties because it's not working. He's like, well, I'll also do this podcast thing. And I was like, tell me about it. And he's like, I interview people. And I was like, okay. So we start talking, and I kind of get into it. And I had the desire to interview celebrities and talk about their stories. But also what I want to do is not just talk to anybody. I want to talk to people that are using their influence to impact the world around them, right? We needed some positive. So I started a podcast called Living a Legacy with Eric Couch, and it's on Spotify and Apple and all the other, you know, everywhere that you find podcasts. And I just started interviewing celebrities and had a blast. My first one, even though it's not on my podcast, my first podcast was Patrick Warburton. Hey, Peter from Family Guy, but he was also Elaine's boyfriend in Seinfeld. And the day that I interviewed Patrick was day number one. In fact, during our podcast, I think something is stated that it's like, all right, it's officially time right now that LA was in lockdown and he could not leave his house. Like it was literally that day, like March 20th. And he was like, all right, we're officially in lockdown. And we're like, crap, man. What is this going to be? And as we were having that discussion and I'm talking to him, I didn't even have the name of the podcast yet. Like I'm interviewing this dude. I didn't even have a name for what it's going to be. And I didn't have the full vision. But from that podcast and that discussion, I got it because as we're talking, you know, it was like all of this stuff, all of this oppressive stuff's going on. And Patrick's like, you know, this is one of the greatest opportunities in my whole life. He's like, my kids are all spread out. They're grown. But because of COVID or this pandemic or whatever, he's like, they've all come home. We're all together. We're watching movies. We're going for walks. We're playing board games. We're drinking wine and watching the sunset. He was like, I never figured I would get this opportunity again. And yet here we are. So while the sky is falling and everybody's panicked, you know, I happen to have the opportunity to talk with this guy who just reminds me we've got such an opportunity to just love the people that we love well because we're all stuck together. And I was like, that's what I want to talk about. So, and because of that, I got to interview 40-something people, 50 people so far, from Patrick Warburton and Les Brown and Kevin Harrington and George Lopez and Dog the Bounty Hunter. And
I was impressed when you were speaking in Parliament with the dude who's the guy that you were.
Oh, Nigel Farage.
Yeah, I mean that's you know, you never impressed me until then. That was impressive.
That was fun. So that was at the London Stock Exchange last September. So yeah, I got to speak at the London Stock Exchange, and Nigel Farage, the creator of Brexit, was there, and got to interview him and speak, and it was really cool. And I always like to ask people, you know, what's the greatest lesson because I'm a money guy, right? So I like to ask them now, what's the greatest lesson you've ever learned about money? And I asked Nigel, and he's so funny. He was like, well, you can lose it very quickly. and he went on and he talked about how when he had the idea of Brexit, it was literally just him standing by himself, but he knew it was the right thing. And then little by little, the entire country came on. But he was like, I was the most hated man in the UK. And so when he's talking about money, he's like, you can lose it quickly. But he also said, you know, you need to diversify. Don't just put it all in one place. And more than anything, don't take yourself so seriously. Sometimes you just need to go down to the pub and drink a pint of beer. And he was like, and when everybody hated me and all of Parliament and the news and all that was bashing me, sometimes I would just go, you know, forget it. And he was like, and I would head down to the pub and I would drink a pint of beer. And I was like, you know, whether it's beer or reading a book or, you know, everybody's got their whatever that is that just lets you step back and go, you know, okay. Forget the world.
The vehicle of letting go.
Yeah.
Yes. That's beautiful. So the time has flown and we're close to our limitation in the the clock today, but this has been so good. So here's a question that I ask every guest, and we've already alluded to touching on this, but I'm amazed at your faith as a child, with your family not necessarily, being a Christian influence really, except your dad, taught you how to pray. And then the journey you took there right before DBU, just awesome. So here's the question, though, that I do ask every guest. What about God?
Yeah. What about him?
Well, the question's for you.
Everything I do, everything that I am, it all starts there. My why always starts with God and honoring and loving people. I don't always do it in a loving way. Sometimes protecting people is not very loving, or at least it doesn't feel that way, right? To them, their perspective is, he's a jerk, wouldn't let me do whatever, but everything I do starts with protecting people and honoring God. Colossians 3:23-4 says, whatever you do, work at it with all your heart, as working for the Lord and not for man, since you'll receive an inheritance from the Lord as your reward. It's the Lord Christ that you serve. And that's just sat with me, and I've just, kind of bathed in that for decades of just everything I want to do, or everything I do, regardless of whether I want to or not, is an homage to God, right? The way I communicate, the way I react, the way I, speak, everything.
Yeah, I think it's very evident in the surrender that I see as a prevalent theme, how you surrendered in pivotal moments in your life, and then doors were open for great things to happen. I think that's the key.
Yeah.
I also like, you touched on a subject that's one of my favorites, and you said it's not always loving to love your neighbor, but in other words, it doesn't always feel like love.
Yeah.
But the commandment is love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
As yourself.
So a lot of times, we love people by telling them things they don't want to hear, or we're loving them as ourselves. So you're doing kind of for other people what you would want done for you.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing we need to be prayerful about, how we do love them in a way that they can receive it and all. But your point is so it's so paramount, and that is love is really not about just sugarcoating and making people feel comfortable in where they are necessarily, but it's also a challenging force.
A lot of time that's not love.
That's right.
Sugarcoating more often than not is not loving.
Right. Challenging sometimes is love, and sharing truth in a loving way that people may not want to hear. I mean, Brexit was a big dose of truth that people didn't want to hear, but it probably saved the great United Kingdom.
Right. And everybody eventually came around. And sometimes they're not going to come around during your lifetime, but you've got to stand there knowing that this is what I'm called to be. This is who I am. And whether anybody else believes it or not, nobody believed that the 4-minute mile was possible until Roger Bannister did it in, I think, 1954. And now there's been thousands of people that have run a 4-minute mile. But prior to that, doctors they were like, it's impossible. So one of the things I love to say, and I know we're wrapping up, right, is, I came up with this a couple years ago. Nobody has ever accomplished what they were convinced was impossible. Right? If you're truly convinced it's impossible, you're not going to do it. But just because somebody else is convinced it's impossible doesn't mean it's impossible. And that's where, it's like, what has God called you to do? How are you uniquely built that I can't do it, right? But you can.
Pioneers and innovators do not wait for permission to do anything.
No.
So I must plug our only sponsor on the show currently, although we are entertaining and canvassing for new and more sponsors. So this is a book that's available. Russell Hobbs wrote this through life experiences over decades. Why do we suffer? Why are we here? Why is life so confusing sometimes? There are a lot of answers in this book. It's on Amazon and other outlets and such. So, Eric, I want to thank you so much for coming. Your show about leaving a legacy is profound and profoundly important.
Yeah.
You're a great family man. You inspire many people around you all the time. You're a successful business person that people can trust you for advice. And now to learn more about you today and some of the tribulation and travail that you went through as a young man, it makes sense more of how you got to be who you are today.
Thanks, dude.
Yes.
Thanks for having me.
So thank you for coming, and all the blessings to you and your family. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, we're going to wrap up a show. Eric Couch is way more than you can fit in 60 minutes. The love seat was in the house. And we'll see you soon on the Russell Hobbs Show. Thank you.